The Locked On Podcast Network presents the NFL Big 3 in 30. The three biggest stories in the NFL from our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The NFL Big 3 in 30 starts now with the biggest story in the NFL.
Howie Roseman continued to add pass rushers on Monday.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast.
The Eagles brought in yet another pass rusher, and the Eagles brought in yet another former Georgia Bulldog first-round defensive player in former New York Giant edge rusher Azeez Ojulari. It's only a one-year deal worth $4 million, but I really like this signing. Azeez Ojulari is only 24 years old. So it continues with the theme that Howie's had this offseason of buy low, low risk, high reward signings of former top picks, a lot of talent that, I don't want to say fell out of favor with their team, but maybe they didn't meet the ceiling or the potential of their draft status, and now you bring them into Philadelphia, and maybe they can be that guy, or in a smaller role, maybe you can get more out of that player, and I think that's exactly what can happen with Ojulari. Is he going to be an every down player for the Eagles? No. But I think he could be a really good complement to Nolan Smith, Jalix Hunt, and whoever the early pick is in the draft that you bring in on the edge. I don't think signing Ojulari or Joshua Uche last week is going to stop this team from investing in an edge rusher in a loaded draft class, because Uche and Ojulari are both only on one-year contracts. But I like having Ojulari as a pass rushing specialist, as like that fourth guy in the rotation, obvious third downs. That's where the Giants used him, and I thought he was a good player. 6 sacks in 2024. He's been on and off injured, so that's why he only had 2.5 sacks in 2023. But he's a consistent 5+ sack guy on limited snaps. He had 5.5 in 2022. He had 8 sacks his rookie year in 2021. He's explosive. He's undersized, so again, you don't want him in obvious running situations. You're not going to see him out there a lot on first and second down. But I like kind of doubling down on that pass rushing specialist. Like that was Joshua Uche last week, a former second-round pick that's had a double-digit sack season. You're not paying him much of anything on a prove-it one-year deal. You run it back, do the same thing this week with Ojulari. Between Ojulari and Uche, I'd imagine at least one of them can be what you hoped Bryce Huff would be, as that pass rush specialist, third or fourth guy in the rotation. Nolan Smith and Jalix Hunt are your full-time players, and then you invest a long-term piece in the draft at this spot. But as I mentioned his name, Bryce Huff, I will say this signing likely says Bryce Huff's time in Philadelphia is coming to an end. They can free up $4 million in cap space if they get rid of Bryce Huff with that post-June 1st designation. If they get rid of him before that, which I think is likely now at this point, because they're going to want to get probably any sort of draft compensation they can, even if it's a conditional day 3 selection. I think they're still going to do that and eat the around $5 million in dead cap that it would take to get him off the books. I continue to say on the show that I think Bryce Huff could be that player that we're describing in Ojulari and Uche as that third down guy, now that you're not asking him to be a full-time player. But I think the Eagles see that that's just probably not a good idea for Bryce Huff, who's probably going to want a change of scenery after being a healthy scratch in the Super Bowl. They probably saw that even though Howie Roseman clearly still believes that Bryce Huff could be something, and he said that during the Super Bowl week, at the same time, I think he knows his defensive coordinator, who he takes his word very seriously, and Vic Fangio, he probably knows Bryce Huff does not have the trust of Vic Fangio. So I think it's best for both parties likely to move on, even though I think Huff can still be that role player, that good role player he was with the New York Jets. But this is a cheaper way to do that. In Ojulari and Uche, I like just kind of doubling down on this, throwing at the wall, see if one of these former high pick sticks kind of move. And Ojulari is a better player than Uche. Last year was a healthy scratch in his own right in the Super Bowl, along with Bryce Huff. Ojulari, yeah, again, he is not an every down player. He's not a first round pick type of guy like the Giants envisioned, but 22 sacks over 4 years isn't that bad. And considering, again, he's been a role player on limited snaps, he's a very efficient pass rusher. So that was the kind of guy I wanted to bring in. I like the sack production. I wanted the Eagles to get deeper with the edge because of Brandon Graham, now we know he's going to retire, which is sad to think about, but I think this also spells the end of BG's time in Philadelphia. With Josh Sweat gone as well and likely Bryce Huff, you were going to lose 3 guys that were a part of that rotation last year. I believe in Jalix Hunt, but at the same time, you want to have some more options in case he doesn't take that next step. Ojulari can be that player. So I like what Howie Roseman did here, but I will say it's only a 1-year contract. Same with Uche. These guys are not every down players, full-time guys. I don't think this means much of anything for Nolan Smith or Jalix Hunt status, and I do not think this means, okay, the Eagles are going to start focusing on other positions in the 2025 NFL draft. Like, no. They are going to draft a pass rusher. Maybe it's the edge, maybe it's defensive tackle. It's going to be at least one early on in this draft, and I think they'll likely take at least one of each, a defensive end and a defensive tackle, before they hit all those picks in round 5. Like, I think both of those spots will likely be off the board by the end of round 4, regardless of what they do in free agency. But this is what Howie Roseman likes to do, is don't block any holes from being filled by a rookie. Like, don't completely lock up a starting job before you get to the draft, but have backup options in case young players aren't ready to go or they just don't pan out. Like, I like that strategy, and that's what Howie's been doing, and he is not really putting himself in a corner at all from a financial perspective with any of these contracts. They are all prove-it deals with little to no guarantees on 1 year, but they're not the Band-Aid signings of the past where it's an older veteran. It's a Bradley Fletcher type or a Malik Jackson. I know I always use Malik Jackson, but that kind of signing, Andrew Sendejo. It's not a Zach Brown, right, from 2019. These are younger players that could still be ascending, that have, like, their careers aren't said and done, that this is who they are. Like, it's a bunch of 24 and 26-year-olds, and I like that way of bargain bin shopping more than what Howie's done in the past with aging veterans that get hurt and their best days are behind them, whereas these guys, their best days could be ahead of them in an environment, in a team that gets the most out of these players. I said that last week with Mekhi Becton. These guys, look at Becton, look at Zach Bond. You could be that next player that was a role player or a backup on another team, and you come into this environment in Philadelphia that has great coaches and great players around you, and that normally gets the most out of talented players that were first and second round picks. So I really like this move, and it's a good signing for very little to no guaranteed money at a total of $4 million over 1 year. All right, Howie Roseman continues to go thrift shopping for young players that maybe didn't hit their ceiling with another team, but they have first, second round talent, and he is banking on his coaches, his strong roster. He's banking on those strong support systems getting the most out of these players. Today's experiment in that way was Azeez Ojulari, formerly of the New York Giants, and yet another Georgia Bulldog, so he'll fit right into that defense. 22 sacks over 4 years in New York, 8 in 2021, 5.5 in 2022. Battled injuries in 2023, so he only had 2.5, and then 6 last year in 2024. But Ojulari is a pass rushing specialist, not an every down player. He's only on a 1-year deal. Same with Joshua Uche. It likely says it's the end of Bryce Huff's time in Philly. Same with Brandon Graham, but not a rookie coming through the 2025 NFL draft. Spoiler, I will be taking defensive linemen in this draft. However, with my first pick, I did not take a lineman, and that's the first time this offseason that I have not taken a lineman with my first selection of our Monday mock drafts. So the Eagles have the 32nd overall pick. I could totally see them try to trade up for, let's say, an edge rusher like James Pierce of Tennessee Falls, or Jalen Walker, because nobody knows where to use him properly at the NFL level. Is he a stand-up linebacker? Is he an edge rusher? Like, how do we use him? Does that make him fall down the board a little bit? Is Walter Nolan there in the at that 24th spot? That's who I keep targeting with the Minnesota Vikings because they only have 4 picks this year. I could totally see the Eagles trading up. Heck, even for now that CGJ is gone, a Malachi Starks. Talk about just adding more Georgia players to that defense, a Swiss Army knife safety that has that kind of athleticism, coverage ability, tackling, could totally see those trade-ups. However, Howie Roseman's also, you can see it again. He's starting to collect draft picks like he did after the Carson Wentz era, so he could be flexible. He could be aggressive, use those picks to go get a proven veteran star if they randomly hit the open market, like an A.J. Brown. Nobody expected that. Maybe in the future there's another player out there that the Eagles can grab in 2026 or beyond. Having draft picks can help you do that. Having those draft picks can help you trade up if a guy like a Jalen Carter falls down the board. It can also help. It allows you to do everything. It allows you to have your cake and eat it too. You can be aggressive, spend, but because you've collected so many draft picks, you still have the quantity of the draft. You can still build your team through those inexpensive rookie deals. So I kind of like the idea of continuing to look for trade downs. And I could see that with this draft that's not super strong. I think the difference between the 15th overall pick and the 40th might not be that crazy of a drop-off. So trading down from 32 is an interesting idea, especially with the depth of this defensive line class. So I decided to trade down from the 32nd overall pick. I collected a second rounder in 2026 from the Miami Dolphins, and I fell down to their second round pick at 48th overall. And I took a safety, Penn State safety Kevin Winston Jr. I think this is an interesting idea after Chauncey Gardner-Johnson left. This might be the biggest hole now on the Eagles roster when it comes to like the immediate 2025. And I think Kevin Winston, if he did not get injured in 2024, you can make the argument he's the second best safety in this class, like maybe even over Nick Emenwari. Some were comparing him and Malachi Starks 2 years ago, saying this is 1A, 1B in that 25 class. But I do think because of Nick Emenwari's combine, because of Malachi Starks' success, that those two will likely be the first two safeties off the board. Kevin Winston Jr. could fall. And I think drafting for need, if it's not a reach, is a smart idea, especially when you're as expensive as the Eagles roster is, because it allows you to fill a hole with a long-term, cheap contract where you have 4 to 5 years of team control. And Kevin Winston is a playmaker. And the Eagles lost not just Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, but Darius Slay. They lost two legitimate playmakers in the secondary. Now, they still have Quinyon Mitchell. They still have Cooper DeJean. Zach Bond's a playmaker as well. So is Reed Blankenship, one of the best fourth-quarter safeties in the league when it comes to turning the ball over, getting interceptions for last year. But 7 interceptions just walked out the door with CGJ and Darius Slay. And I think you need another playmaker in that secondary. I like Sidney Brown, but I don't know how much Vic Fangio likes Sidney Brown, and I think they could do better. Kevin Winston Jr. is a really interesting player. Like, he's got the range of Sidney Brown. He has that speed. He's got much better coverage ability, in my opinion. Really long arms. He's a good tackler, and he is that playmaker. Like, he has a nose for turnovers, interceptions. You can play him as a, cover 2 deep safety. You can play him as, in the box. He flies downhill. Kevin Winston, if he falls in the second round, I don't think he's worth the 32nd overall pick, but I could totally see the Eagles going for somebody like Winston with that first pick in the second round. And since we traded down here from 32nd, that first pick in the second round of the two that we have, that's going to end up being the first pick.
March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. There's always that 5-12 you got to pick, and usually 2, maybe 3. That 4-13 matchup, FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, game props. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on. The FanDuel app is simple to use. And when I win, I get paid instantly. No waiting around. Looking at the first 4, we've got controversy. North Carolina, the most controversial team in the tournament, and they take on San Diego State tonight. The Tar Heels are favored by 5.5 points. We'll see if they reward the committee for placing them in the tournament. Visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoop action all tournament long.
The Steelers signed another free agent in Juan Thornhill.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast.
The Steelers add Juan Thornhill, free agent safety. Now, for those long-time listeners of the Locked On Steelers podcast, I was a big Juan Thornhill guy back when he was coming out in the draft. I loved Juan Thornhill then. I loved him when he was in free agency before. So for me, this is like me saying, I called my shot 6 years ago. Not really. But I think this is a really good fit to give them a third safety option and a better deep safety option than what they've had behind Minkah Fitzpatrick and Deshaun Elliott. What are your opinions on this signing and what it says about their defensive plans?
Well, Chris, I covered Juan Thornhill when he was a freshman at Virginia. So, yeah, this is This is taking us both back a little bit. I think
2015.
Yeah, it was on the beat in 2015. Yeah.
Oof.
Yeah. I think this is a good player. I think this is obviously the replacement for Dante KZ. He's younger. I think a bit of an upgrade, a little bit more versatile, a little more thickly built guy, a guy you can put down in the box. Maybe not necessarily like as his permanent position, but you can kind of rotate him around in there and he won't get embarrassed. Probably not gonna like come flying out of nowhere and kill people like KZ would occasionally, but like other than that, I think this is a nice piece for a third safety. I think having a little bit of versatility especially is good, and I think he's a guy that could back up both positions as well, which KZ could not do when he was the backup. Minka was the backup strong safety.
Yeah, Dante KZ, 5'11", 174 listed. Juan Thornhill, 6 foot 205. Definitely some thickness on that man. But I think the biggest thing, even outside of the size, is the ability to play deep coverage. One thing I've always loved about Juan Thornhill from his time with the Chiefs is his ability to help in different coverages. I think he does a really good job keeping the lid on plays. He rarely gets destroyed for big plays. He did give up a couple touchdowns last year with the Browns. But like you look at his time with the Chiefs, he was an asset to them. Now, the thing is, he wasn't a superstar safety. And if you're not a superstar safety, you often don't get paid, big money. But I think he was a significant part of some of their Super Bowl years when he was there. And I think that adding a guy like you said, it gives them that flexibility behind the defense, behind the cornerbacks, to have a guy where they can be a little bit more flexible. Whereas, Terrell Austin, I think a big part of his defense is being able to move guys in the secondary around and disguise things and say, hey, Minka Fitzpatrick may be lined up here, but he could be over there in a second. But to have that ability, you need to have multiple safeties that can play deep and cover deep without being a major liability. And I feel like that's where KZ wasn't able to help as much in the coverage. I think that's something that Juan Thornhill can do a bit better at.
Yeah, I mean, they've still got to do it. Like, I think they could have done more of it last year, even though they didn't necessarily have the ideal personnel for it, but they didn't communicate it very well. So I think this will be a test for new secondary coach Gerald Alexander. If they want to do that stuff, and I think Thornhill is a good piece to do it with, they've got to find a way to execute at a higher level than it did last year. I think that's one of the big storylines. Like when we get to OTAs, I think we're going to be talking about is the secondary going to be able to do the things it needs to do to have success with fewer missed assignments than they had last year?
Well, that was the next thing I was going to get to, so I'm glad you brought that up, because you see Juan Thornhill coming in with a good amount of experience. He'll be 30, I think, by the time by like the 6th week of the season. Of course, we've talked about Darius Slay coming in. Is this like a bigger part of the plan to just bring a bunch of guys with experience into the secondary that maybe can, because I think another thing that Juan Thornhill has on the side is, at least what I used to study him more closely, I remember him being a disciplined player that was very much, he could play the structure of a defense, not rarely be caught out of position and be able to play to his assignment. I think in addition, like Slay, that's how Slay makes his hay these days. He's not a 4.38, 40-yard dash guy anymore. So he has to be assignment, good on his assignment football. And if Thornhill's the same light here, now all of a sudden, two of the weaker spots of the secondary from last year, when it came to assignment football, aren't on the roster anymore, and you've replaced them with guys who have the reputations of being stronger there. Is it reasonable to expect that to change, or do you think there could be still some serious hangups when it comes to communication in the Steelers secondary?
Well, experience is good, but it's also going to be new pieces together, and so they'll have to figure it out. But I think it's a clearly different idea than what we see in, say, like the offensive line, where they drafted a bunch of young guys. They want to put those young guys together. They want them to grow together. I think you're seeing the secondary this greater value and experience, where it's like, okay, we got two young guys in Joey Porter and Beanie Bishop. That's probably like, I know everybody wants the team to get younger, but like, if you're already having trouble communicating, the last thing you want to do is go throwing rookies into that equation. They're bound to screw it up. So like, I think there is definitely, especially in the secondary, a bit of an emphasis on, let's get some communicators in there, some guys who definitely know what they're doing, and make sure we get the ones we got coached up before we go injecting more youth into that room.
No, I hear that. And I think that that's the thing here is that you bring in veterans to help kind of piece things together and lead the thing. And that's something that the Steelers, I think when they've been at their best in recent years on defense, they've been high-level communicators. And that's a big part, again, of what Terrell Austin brings to the table. I've talked about this before when looking at the numbers. Keith Butler was more about bringing heat, and that was how he was going to win. And the coverage designs behind that were somewhat bland when he was kind of in control of that. Terrell Austin is the opposite. He may not bring the most complex heat, blitz schemes, but he's going to bring some more complex coverage schemes. And I even broke down how one of the touchdowns allowed in the Ravens game was a play where Cam Sutton was had the design and was in the position to fool Lamar Jackson into throwing an interception in the end zone. He was just too slow to get there, and it wound up being a touchdown, but they got the throw they wanted. It was just that Cam Sutton misplayed that situation. The Steelers need guys that don't misplay those spots. And I think that's, again, why Cam Sutton was such a disappointment last year, because if nothing else, he was a guy that used to be a guy who could communicate well and could handle the role well. And I think that's what the Steelers have to hope, is that they don't have any Cam Sutton-like disappointments from any of their signings this year. Juan Thornhill, Darius Slay, Brian Eccles, all these guys that they're bringing in, they need these guys to show that they're savvy veterans that can communicate, keep things together, and keep the plays in front of them without making the big mistakes that allow the big plays.
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it. And I like the guys they got. I think it's a good group, and we'll see if they even draft one here. Like I think if now got the secondary to a point where it's like, if there's one there, great. But if not, I think I'm okay with Corey Trice, Beanie Bishop, Juan Thornhill being the 5, 6, 7 DBs. Like, that's not bad.
It's not. The other aspect of this, even just outside of current roster construction, is yet again, Omar Khan signs a guy who was cut and will not count against the compensatory pick formula. And that's something that you and I have continued to talk about. It seems like that is a big part of the Steelers' strategy to make sure that they can try to get as many comp picks next year as possible to add to their arsenal in case they want to trade up for a quarterback.
Yeah, it's definitely a part of the plan. And this is another signing that fits that. I don't know how much he's going to make anyway, if it would have been a big deal, but it's been clearly a thing that they were targeting this offseason.
March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. There's always that 5-12 you got to pick, and usually 2, maybe 3. That 4-13 matchup, FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, game props. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. No waiting around. Looking at the first 4, we've got controversy. North Carolina, the most controversial team in the tournament, and they take on San Diego State tonight. The Tar Heels are favored by 5.5 points. We'll see if they reward the committee for placing them in the tournament. Visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoop action all tournament long.
The Dallas Cowboys make a big splash in free agency.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast.
On Friday afternoon, the Cowboys actually made a pretty big signing for them, bringing back Dante Fowler on a 1-year, $6 million deal that can go up to $8 million based on incentives. We were hoping the Cowboys would address their edge rusher need, and they brought back Fowler.
Yeah, they did. It feels like they brought him back, and it kind of is at least the cherry on top for the pass rush aspect of the defensive end position, right? Like, you feel like now with Fowler, with obviously Micah, with Sam Williams, with Marshawn Nealon, you've got a quad group of a group of 4 that you feel like you can go to war with, right? You can go after and get after the quarterback. Obviously, adding in Osa, retaining him as your kind of Robin to Micah's Batman obviously helps as well. But now on top of that, you still have waves of defensive ends that can come in and rush the passer. I don't think that means that they are necessarily finished at the defensive end position. No. I think that they probably still could add another big body to play, in early downs if they wanted to improve that situation, or if they just, something fell to them in their lap in the draft. But I think that with the addition of Fowler, I feel like you've at least satisfied the need for pass rush talent on the outside for going into the 2025 season.
Feels like they have an actual real NFL defensive line now, right? Like they have their starters and they've got some good rotational players. If let's call Nealon the starter, because I've got a feeling they're going to want a bigger body on early downs.
Yeah.
And now you've got Sam Williams and you've got Dante Fowler as backups. You did bring in Solomon Thomas to help back up Oso Digizua. You did sign Peyton Turner. You brought back Tyrus Wheat. Like you said, I think it still needs some more top-end talent, but you can absolutely win games with this pass rush unit. And to get Fowler back on a 1-year, $6 million deal, I think is a pretty solid deal. We saw him have a bunch of sacks last year. Now, some of the advanced numbers were down a little bit, but I think that's partially because you're not playing opposite of Micah Parsons, right? Now back in Dallas, he's only ever going to see single blocks and lesser tackles. I would expect Fowler to be a productive edge rusher once again for Dallas.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always been kind of the thing with him, right? Is that it's always felt like with Fowler, you've always needed a guy on the opposite side of him to kind of take away some of the attention, because where Fowler really truly feasts is on, one-on-one opportunities, isolated opportunities when all of the attention is on the other side of on the other side of the offensive line. So yeah, I mean, kind of going into a situation in Washington where, I think Armstrong sort of took over that role a little bit as the season went on, but especially early on, it was Fowler who was getting kind of the lion's share of the attention there. Until Armstrong found his way, still managed 11 sacks and played, I think, over 600 snaps. I think I agree. With just less attention on him and just him playing, significantly less snaps than he had to play at Washington, where they just didn't have the depth that Dallas is going to have on the defensive end spot. I think it's going to give a chance for Fowler to kind of get back to the high efficiency that we saw him have when he was with the Cowboys 23 and 22.
And I've got to assume like the Cowboys are going to know how to use him. I don't think he's going to be your day one starter at edge. Maybe he is, but he's not going to play starter snaps. Where he's going to come on where he's going to be useful is, hey, it's 2nd and 10. It's 3rd and 8. Fowler's on the field. And maybe you find ways to get creative and have Sam Williams and Micah and Fowler on the field. But
yeah,
I don't think anybody is expecting this to be like, hey, this is your 800 snap starter opposite of Micah Parsons. It just gives you another quality depth player that they absolutely needed.
Yeah, and pass rush, right? Specifically, obviously, he's a defensive pass rusher, so like you needed another kind of expert there to just give that pass rush some teeth. I think again, if you're adding Dante Fowler as the top of your pass rush, you're probably not thrilled about the whole situation. But if you're adding him as a complementary piece, a third, threat to kind of complement Parsons and Odigizua, I think you like that. I think you like what he was able to do last year when he was kind of forced into the limelight, and now in a more reduced role as part of a rotation, you feel like he can get that efficiency back up and still be a real threat on the outside.
So overall, we're both very happy with this move. We were actually talking on the phone the other day, like, why hasn't Dante Fowler signed yet? Like, he's too good of a player to be on the market. But we're going to have a general conversation about the Cowboys' strategy and free agency later this week. But one of the things our mutual friend John Oney keeps bringing up is, for a team that's talked about wanting to defend the run better, they really haven't signed anybody that's good at stopping the run. That's never been Dante Fowler's strategy or strength. It's never been Solomon Thomas's strength. Where are they going to find the run defenders to improve this unit?
I think it's a fair question to ask. But I also think that the answer is later. I think the thing is that the pass rush element is obviously the more valuable of the two kind of aspects of defense, right? Like you pay the pass rushers more than you pay the run stoppers. You pay the cover guys more than you pay the guys that are coming down to the box to also defend the run as well. And I think that what that means is that a lot of those guys that you may hired to kind of be run stopping specialists, they should still be available as we get closer and closer to the draft. And on the other side of the draft, I mean, think about when we signed, our run stuffing nose tackles and that sort of thing. Like that's all done on the other side of the draft. There's also plenty of opportunity, I think, to draft somebody who could come in and impact the game positively in the run game later in the draft. Because like I said, I think the passing aspect of it, the pass rush aspect of it, is something that's more valuable. If you want to go in and get a big run stuffing defensive tackle who doesn't provide you anything as a pass rusher, those guys are going to be available later in the draft and then also on the other side of the draft. So I think there's still time. I think that's, why, I mean, not necessarily why they haven't signed anybody yet, but I think that's why there isn't necessarily urgency here, because I think that you could still cobble together improvements in the run defense. I mean, the key is you got to do it still, but I think that there is still more time to get that done than there was trying to improve areas of your pass rush.
And I don't want to talk too much about the draft, but this is why I'm becoming more open to the idea of taking like Shamar Stewart in round 1. He doesn't have the sack production, but he was a really good run defender at A&M. Fowler's on a 1-year deal. Sam Williams is on the last year of his deal. I think you could draft somebody like Stewart. He could come right in and help your run defense as a defensive end as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, again, I think they haven't done anything yet that has closed off any avenues of improvement at the defensive line. Yeah. So, if they, like you said, if Stewart falls to them and they like him, if they get to the second or third round and one of these bigger bodies guys like Kennard falls to them and they like him, I wouldn't at all be shocked to see them pull the trigger there and just add a different body type to the defensive line that maybe can do both, that can give you some early down run stoppage and then also be a developmental pass rusher.